Narayana Samarambam Vyasa Shankara Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. Hi everybody. Sorry it's been a while since I have posted any videos. I was out of town visiting some relatives, and then I kind of came down with a pretty bad cold, so just now getting over that, feeling a little bit better. So I thought I'd go ahead and get back to posting some videos. I was going to do the next installment of Tattva Bodha and finish our discussion on the three states, but I've received a couple of questions about some of the videos I've recently posted, so I wanted to go ahead and get to those first. This question came in, and I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit. I had to kind of shorten it and paraphrase it, kind of rearrange it a little bit to make it a little clearer. So I apologize to the person who wrote in. I'm not trying to mess with what you said here, but I just want to try to make it a little easier, make the question a little easier to understand. So the question is, in your latest video, you talk about the body disappearing. Does the body disappear, or rather become inoperable? This, I feel, is where Vedanta starts to meet quantum mechanics and the Copenhagen interpretation, which says that something only exists when it is observed. When we are in the dream state, we are not observing the gross body. So, does it exist? Maybe not. Do we exist because of the universe, or does the universe exist because of us? I think if it is the latter, you can have the gross body being non-existent when you are not observing it. I feel that too many complex issues abound for us to exist because of the universe. I'll have to say here, right off the bat, when I'd said in the video that the body disappears, it wasn't exactly a question of whether or not the body existed or did not exist. The issue was that the body is not perceived when you sleep. And when you go to sleep, you do not experience your body. You don't see it, you don't taste it, you don't smell it, you don't feel it in any kind of way. That's the main point that I was trying to make. I just want to make that clear up front. The reason being is that what Vedanta says is that something that's real does not change and is self-evident. So, aside from the fact that it's very clear in the waking state, when you're awake, it's very clear that you can see the body continuously changes. Your body's not even the same from moment to moment on a cellular level, but as you on an observable level, because it's not like you can see your cells dividing and your red blood cells multiplying and your DNA replicating. You can't see that sort of thing, even though it's happening from moment to moment. Okay, on that basis, the body changes constantly. But since you can't really see that, on an observable level, you can see that your body is different from week to week, month to month, year to year. When you're a child, it's obvious to see that your body was much smaller and less developed than what it is when you're an adult. When you're an adult, maybe your hair starts to go gray over time, or you start to lose some weight or gain some weight, or you get a couple wrinkles, or however that may be. You can see that the body changes over time. So on that level alone, we can see that according to the definition given by Vedanta, that something is only real if it never changes. We can see that the body is not real according to that definition. Okay. An extension of that is the whole thing about sleep. If the body was real, it wouldn't disappear when you sleep either. And now if the body was real, for instance, it would never change, because for all intents and purposes, your childhood body has disappeared because it's no longer present. So we can say that the whole, whether the body is perceived or experienced or not perceived and not experienced, indicates change. Okay? So if it's changeless, then it would always be available to be experienced and perceived. Okay? So when I say, the point that I'm trying to make is that when the body disappears in deep sleep, it's not available for experience, which indicates that it changes. All right? So that means that the body, based on that, isn't real. The other part of something being real is that it's ever present. So again, the body not being present to your perception, to your experience, is another reason that it's not real. Right? So maybe you might say, this is where the question comes in basically. He says, well, I don't see it when I sleep, but maybe it's still there. Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I'll talk about that in a minute. The point being is whether the body is there or not. For something to be real, it has to be self-evident. Okay? Meaning, it cannot depend on any means of knowledge to be known. So the body, for instance, doesn't follow that criteria because you can't know the body without the instrument of the mind. And the mind contains all of the sense organs. Okay, so right now I can see my body, and I assume you can see your body. Now, am I seeing my body on its own? Is the body self-evident? Or does the body require something to be known? Okay, well, the body requires something to be known. It requires your eyes, for instance. You have to have eyes, and assuming that those eyes actually function, meaning they're backed by the organ of eye in the mind. Okay, so you have physical eyes and the organ of eye in the mind. Okay, you have to have those two things to be able to see your body. And it goes for all the other senses too. I have to have a nose, and I have to have the sense organ of nose in the mind or subtle body to smell the body, and tongue to taste the body, ears to hear the sounds the body makes, and nerves and skin to actually feel the body, whether it be internal or external, either one. So what we're saying is that the body is not self-evident. It needs the mind and the sense organs to be known. So in that case, it not being self-evident, it needing another instrument to be revealed, to be known, it also cannot be real. And that's the other point that's being made about sleep. And when you go to sleep, your mind and your sense organs shut down, and effectively your body disappears because it's no longer available for perception. So whether the body has actually disappeared, or you just can't see it and experience it, doesn't matter. Okay? Vedanta is not concerned with whether or not the body is actually there when you sleep. Okay? It's completely not concerned with that. I hope that that is clear. What Vedanta is concerned about is demonstrating whether or not the body is self-evident, because we're trying to determine if you're the body, if the body is the self. Now we're saying that the self is real, meaning it's ever present and self-evident. It doesn't require anything to be known. Okay? You don't have to have eyes for the self to be known. You don't have to have a mind for the self to be known. You don't have to have senses, because the self is the consciousness in which the mind and all of the senses appear. Anything that appears in consciousness that's known to you as an object, the self is not an object. It is what the objects appear in. Since the self is consciousness, that's its very nature. Okay, so you could say this, the nature of the self is consciousness or knowingness itself. It is that which knows. Then it doesn't require any external media or instruments or means of knowledge to be known, because it is that which allows knowledge of the sense organs to even be known in the first place, because the knowledge that comes through the mind, the knowledge that comes through perception or experience, all are objects that appear in you in consciousness. So consciousness or existence, they're the same thing, are self-evident. Therefore, they meet the criteria of being real. The body requires instruments to be known, and therefore it does not meet the requirement of being self-evident and real. So that's the whole point here. I need to make that very, very clear. There is this question in philosophy, and maybe I've touched on some of this a little bit in the videos before, but I never really wanted to go into it in depth because I didn't think it was necessary, but I do get a lot of questions, or have been getting a lot of questions about this, so I want to make sure to say something here. There is an idea in philosophy of subjective idealism, and that means that the world only amounts to your own personal experience. Because it's true, you can't really ever experience a world outside of your own personal perception. You could show me a video that you shot in China, but I'm only ever experiencing that video at the moment, in the present moment, in my own perception. So I can't ever definitively say, without a doubt, that there is a world outside of what I perceive at any given moment. You know, it's that whole question, does my wife exist when I don't see her? Well, I can't prove definitively that she does. I can't prove definitively, though, that she doesn't. There's good reason to think otherwise. You know, I can tell you, for instance, that I exist when you don't see me. But can I ever definitively show that? No, because you don't see me when you don't see me. You know, I could show you a picture of myself existing when you don't see me, or a video of myself existing when you don't see me, but that video or that picture only appears in your perception in the present moment. So there's no definitive way to prove that. Okay, not definitively. Before I talk more about this, though, because there are reasons to think that the world is there when you don't see it, okay? But before I talk about this, I want to make this really, really clear that whether the world exists when you personally perceive it or not has no bearing on Vedanta at all. It's a philosophical rabbit hole that you can go chasing and never really find the bottom of. It's not important to Vedanta. It's an interesting question, no doubt about it. But it's not important to Vedanta whether or not Vishnu exists when you don't see him or not. It is absolutely irrelevant. So please let me make that clear before I talk about this issue anymore. Concerning Vedanta, okay, Vedanta is inquiry, self-inquiry, and it is concerned with removing false ideas about the self, about what your true nature is. And its only goal is enlightenment or moksha. Okay, so that whole thing of self-inquiry, enlightenment, moksha does not depend at all on this question of subjective idealism. Does the world exist when I see it or not? Okay, and again, I'm talking about perception. Okay, I mean, when you personally see the world, does it exist, does it only exist when you personally see it, taste it, and touch it, or not? Okay, this question is not relevant to Vedanta. And then why is that? Because whether the world exists only when you personally see it or not, the question of Vedanta is, am I this appearance, or am I the consciousness that knows this appearance? So we're only concerned with the distinction between the conscious subject and the unconscious objects. So whether the world is there or not when you don't see it doesn't matter, because there's always some kind of object appearing in front of you. And the only question that we're concerned with here is, am I this object? Are these objects real? Or are they unreal? And am I the subject? That's the only question that we're concerned with here. So it doesn't matter. Do the objects exist when I don't see them? It doesn't matter. Because what we're trying to say is, are the objects real? And whether the objects are there when I see them or not, it's clear that they're not real, because when you do see them, you can see that they constantly change. And the fact that they appear and disappear from your perception, whether they're still there or not, doesn't matter. They're still not real, because, as I said earlier, something that's real is self-evident. So it's the same situation as your body in sleep. When objects disappear out of your perception, whether they're there or not, they still are dependent on your own personal sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing to be known to be there. They do not reveal themselves by their own self. And because of that, they're not real. For those objects to be real, they have to be self-evident. And only consciousness, only existence is self-evident, not requiring any kind of instrument to be seen, heard, tasted, or touched. Because seeing, hearing, tasting, and touching can only be known in consciousness, which is not dependent on any of those particular instruments. So that's really the issue. We're not concerned about whether or not the objects exist when we don't see them. It's an interesting question, like I said, but it's not a Vedantic question. It's not a question that really can be answered, and it's not a question that enlightenment hinges on. It's something that we can sit around and debate, but all that Vedanta is asking is, are these objects real, and are you an object? So without knowing whether or not the objects exist when you see them or not, you can clearly determine that the objects are not real. And that because the objects are known to you, you are not an object. Okay? The objects aren't real because they constantly change, and the objects are not real because they depend on instruments of knowledge to be known. They depend on your eyes to be seen. They depend on your nose to be smelled. They depend on your tongue to be tasted, etc. Something that's real, the self, does not depend on any instruments to be known, because it is knowingness or consciousness itself. See, so that's the real issue here. So I really highly encourage people to focus on that rather than spending too much time trying to answer a question that really can't be answered and doesn't have any particular relevance to the pursuit of enlightenment. So I want to go back to the question here before I want to discuss this a little bit more, just in all fairness. I don't want to write the question off. I would like to try to talk about it a little more, but I just wanted to put everything in context first to show that this discussion is interesting but not relevant to inquiry. This is where, does the body disappear or rather become inoperable? Either way, with Vedanta, doesn't matter. We're just concerned with investigating the body and seeing if it's real or not, and if it's us. Okay? And using inquiry, whether we know that the body disappears or becomes inoperable in sleep, we can determine that we're not the body and that the body is not real. This is where I feel Vedanta starts to meet quantum mechanics and the Copenhagen interpretation, which says something only exists when it is observed. I personally don't know anything about the Copenhagen interpretation. I'll admit that I tried to look it up and do kind of a scan of the summary of the Copenhagen interpretation, and honestly, it's over my head. Quantum physics is very interesting. And Vedanta doesn't have any beef with quantum physics. Okay, science and Vedanta are very harmonious, but I don't know anything in depth about quantum physics, so I'm not really going to try to delve into that subject and make myself sound stupid. So the Copenhagen interpretation, which says something only exists when it is observed. Okay, well, like I said, we can't ever prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that something is there when we don't see it. But one thing, and Vedanta is not concerned with that. But one thing that does relate to Vedanta is the idea that, well, this world depends on me to exist. And by me, I'm not talking about the self. I'm talking about the mind. This world depends on the perception of my mind. Okay, now perception and consciousness are not the same thing. This is a very Vedantic issue here. All right, perception is what you see, what you taste, what you smell, what you feel, what you hear. Now, is that perception consciousness, or is that perception an object that appears in consciousness? Well, it's an object that appears in consciousness. So basically, when we say, does an object depend on my perception, what we're asking really is, does this one object depend on this other object? Because both perception and objects are the same thing. They're objects. Your perception, what you see, what you hear, what you taste, what you smell, is actually an object. So the question is then, if someone says, well, this world depends on my mind, or this world depends on me personally to exist, because that's the implication of saying, well, maybe these objects don't exist when I don't see them. You're saying that existence of objects depends on perception. But perception is also an object. And furthermore, what is this person upon which these objects depend? Can you find this person? The person is also an object. The body is an object. The mind is an object that is known. It appears in you in consciousness. And furthermore, when you try to investigate a person, you don't even really find anything there. I mean, is it the body? If so, which part of the body? Is the person the mind? If so, which part of the mind? If so, maybe it's the body and the mind combination, well, which person are you talking about? The person that was here 5 minutes ago, 5 days ago, 5 years ago? The person that's here right now? And now that the body and mind have changed, this person? You can't even really find a person there for things to depend on, okay? Because the person is constantly changing. And ultimately, the whole relative person that's known to you boils down to thoughts in the mind. So again, we can't say that objects depend on perception, because perception is an object, and we can't say that the world depends on the existence of the phenomenal apparent world depends on a particular person, because that particular person is part and parcel of the objective world, because it is also an object. And further, you can't even really find a person there, because a person is just a collection of ever-changing thoughts and body parts, basically. So you can't really say that, when you say, well, this world depends on my perception, it's like, what's the I, what's the my that you're talking about? There, you can't really find a substantial I or my to be there for the world to depend on, and you can't find a substantial I or my in the apparent world to be projecting or generating this world. So that also doesn't make sense. Again, we can't ever definitively prove that, but that's a fairly logical way to look at it and say, all right, when we're talking about the existence of objects, perception is an object. So other objects don't depend on them for that. Okay, we want to at least dispel the notion that you personally are projecting this world, and that is not the case. That is definitely a Vedantic question. So I hope that clears things up a little bit. Again, the question says, when we are in the dream state, we are not observing the gross body. So does it exist? Maybe not. Well, maybe so, maybe not. Again, we've kind of gone over this. Either way, it doesn't exactly matter. We are only concerned about whether the body is real and whether or not we are the body. And the body, based on inquiry, is not real. And based on inquiry, we can see that we are not the body. Do we exist because of the universe, or does the universe exist because of us? Now, this is a very Vedanta question, but I wanted to clarify first about the issue of consciousness versus perception. Consciousness and perception are not the same thing. Consciousness is consciousness, it's what you are, and perception is an object that appears in you. So we have to look at this question in two ways. Do we exist because of the universe, or does the universe exist because of us? Now, if we, or the I that we're referring to here, is perception, meaning the mind of the apparent person, then no, the existence of the universe does not depend on the perception of an individual person, because perception is part and parcel of the universe. Your perception and what you perceive, all of that is an object. So those do not depend on one another. The world does not depend on your particular mind to exist. The world does not depend on your sense organs or your ego to exist. It doesn't make sense because they're all part of the same objective, apparent world. However, if we're asking this question of, does the universe exist because of us, and us referring to consciousness or the self, then the answer is yes. And I believe the person here gets that by saying, I think if it is the latter, meaning the universe exists because of us, you can have the gross body being non-existent when you are not observing it. So it is true, the latter statement is true. Do we exist because of the universe, or does the universe exist because of us? Well, the universe exists because of us. Us meaning consciousness, the self. Now, why is that? Because everything in the universe depends on consciousness to even be said to exist. You cannot say that the world exists at all without consciousness. You can't even have perception without consciousness. So both the world, perception, the contents of your mind, all of that depends on you, consciousness, the self in which those things appear. So very much the universe depends on you, meaning the self, to exist. Okay? The universe does not depend on your particular mind or perception to exist, because those are all just objects equally. But it does depend on consciousness, the self, to exist. That is true, because you cannot have objects, you cannot have perception, you cannot have the mind, you cannot have the universe, the apparent person, without consciousness. Without consciousness, nothing can be said to exist. And furthermore, consciousness and existence are the exact same thing. The words used to describe the self are Sat, Chit, Ananda, or Ananta. Sat means existence, Chit means consciousness. Consciousness and existence are the exact same thing. So, the very existence of everything is you, consciousness. So this is why we can say that the existence of the universe depends on you, because you are the very existence of the universe. Now you might say, well, then that means that I'm an object. It doesn't mean that, because if you look at objects, you can see the name and the form of the object, the shape, the color, all of those kind of things. And we've determined that the shape and the color, the name and the form of objects has no substance. It's not real. But you have to say that the object is. The object exists. So chair exists. Now, chair is a name. It has no substance. It refers to a form which also has no substance and no reality. However, existence exists. Existence is real. Now, you said, like I said, I posed the question, well, then that means that existence is an object. Well, it's not. Because if you look at the world around you, you can say chair is, microphone is, fan is, door is, wall is, chair is, guitar is. The name and the form of the objects does differ. That guitar is black, that chair is white, that doorknob is silver, that fuse box is gray, that vent is white, whatever. It goes on and on. You know, the chair is this big, the guitar is that big. The name and the form all change, but what doesn't change is existence. Isness of everything. Has no particular name, has no particular form. It just is. The existence of each and every object is the same. The names and the forms differ, yes, but the existence of that name, the existence of that form, itself has no name, itself has no form. Existence is nameless, formless, ever-present, and all-pervasive. Where can you find anywhere that there is not existence? It's everywhere. Anything that is exists. It's all-pervasive. And it's formless, because you can say this chair has form, but existence itself does not have a form. It exists. That's it. It exists. The chair exists equally as the door exists, equally as the carpet exists, equally as the wall exists. It's the same. It's ever present. It's always there. There's never a time when existence is not existing. Even when you sleep, deep sleep exists. If you say there's nothing in deep sleep, well, to say that there actually is nothing, then nothing has to exist. So even nothingness exists. So at any time, in any place, existence always is. So everything, all objects, all name and all form exists. The name and the form are not real because they change, they're not always present, and they depend on the organs of perception or the mind to be known. However, existence does not. Existence is always present. Existence is uniformly present, unchanging at all times. The existence of any given object is the exact same as any other object and is always the same. Because what? You say, well, this chair exists. Well, if I get rid of the chair, does existence go? No. Then space exists. The absence of the chair exists. Or you put a cup where the chair was. Well, the cup exists. Existence exists in the chair. The space around the chair exists. The door next to the chair exists. The light in the space in this room exists. Existence is equally the same and ever present at all times. That is what you are. That existence, that consciousness is you. They're the same thing. And so based on that, all objects, the entire world, does in fact depend on you for existence. It is borrowing existence from you, the reality, consciousness, the self. And I know this is kind of a abstract concept, and I do hope that I'm explaining this properly and in enough detail. It is kind of a large topic and a little hard to understand. So I hope that my explanation here has been adequate. I think if it's the latter, meaning the universe depends on us to exist, you can have the gross body being non-existent when you are not observing it. Well, whether it exists or does not exist is not important, according to Vedanta. But here's the thing. You can't have something have two contradictory natures. Okay, the body either exists or it doesn't exist. That's we've kind of gone over that before. Existence and non-existence cannot be equally in two things. I mean, if the body was totally non-existent, you would never experience it, ever. It's just not real. It's neither real nor unreal. This is where our whole category of apparent or mithya comes in. The body is not real because it changes and it's transient. And it depends on particular means of knowledge, such as the sense organs, to be known. So it's not real, but it's not non-existent, because you cannot experience something that is totally non-existent. Non-existent means never was, never will be. It's logically impossible. Non-existent, you can't see or taste or touch something that's non-existent, and you very well can see, taste, and touch this body. And if the body was ever non-existent, you can't have a non-existent entity become existent. It is logically impossible. How can something that's totally non-existent, if that's really what it is, if non-existence is its nature, then how can something that is non-existent truly ever exist? It can't. So the body is not non-existent, but it's not existent, meaning real either, because of these reasons. The body is mithya, meaning it is neither real nor non-existent. It falls into a category in between that essentially cannot be totally explained. We cannot explain mithya because of that. So I want to make that clear, this whole existent, non-existent kind of thing. Existent is sat. Existent is the self, is consciousness. Only the self exists. Objects, because you can see and taste and touch them, exist. Okay, but not actually. They are apparently existing. They are sort of existent, if you want to put it that way, right? But they are not totally non-existent, because something that's non-existent can never become existent, and something that's non-existent can never be experienced. So the body does not fall into that category. I just wanted to make that point because the whole definition of existent, non-existent, and apparently existent are very fundamental to Vedanta. And it says, I feel that there are too many complex issues abound for us to exist because of the universe. That's correct. The universe depends on you, meaning consciousness. The universe does not depend on you, meaning the body and mind. I hope that's become very clear. It's obvious that the universe depends on consciousness to exist, because without consciousness, you cannot say that there is a universe. The universe is not self-revealing. It's not self-evident. For instance, if you have a light bulb is itself a source of light. You don't need another light to shine on that to be seen. Okay, so if I have a lighter, okay, say an imaginary lighter here, and it's making a flame, that flame is evident in and of itself. I don't have to have a flashlight over here to shine light on the flame to make it able to be seen. Okay, the flame in and of itself, its nature is light and illumination. It illumines on its own. It does not need help from something else. Consciousness is similar. Consciousness is conscious. Consciousness is knowingness. Consciousness is what allows things to be known. So since it is consciousness and knowingness, it doesn't need a second consciousness to make it conscious. It does not need a second knowingness to make it known. This is why you, the self, are self-evident. You don't have to have an eyeball to see consciousness, because eyeballs and seeing are only known because they appear in knowingness, in consciousness, in you. So based on that, we can say, all right, so consciousness is this self-evident, self-knowing, self-luminous entity. Okay, that's what you are. And the universe, being comprised of all of the objects, are not self-evident. They are not their own source of consciousness. They are not their own source of light, the way that a light bulb is. They do require something to be seen. Okay? If I have my lighter, I don't need the flashlight to illuminate. However, if I'm in a dark room and I have the lighter in my hand, but I don't have the flame turned on, do I see the lighter? Do I see the flame? I don't. I don't see anything. It's totally dark. In that case, I do have to turn the flashlight on so I can see that I have the lighter in my hand. And that is the same case with consciousness and objects. Okay? Consciousness is like the lighter that's not lit. It has no light of its own. It's not self-evident. It's not self-luminous. In that case, I do have to have a light to be able to see the unlit lighter in my hand. Objects are like that unlit lighter. You cannot know and see objects without consciousness. They are not conscious in and of themselves. And so based on that, you can see that yes, in fact, the universe does depend on you meaning consciousness, because no universe can be known or said to exist without consciousness existence itself. It's not the same case with your own personal perception, your body, your mind, and your senses, because that perception itself is an object that requires consciousness to be known. And so it looks like we've probably gone over our time here for this Q&A, but I do hope that this answer has been helpful. And if there's any follow-up questions, please feel free to send them to me. Purnamidaf, Purnamidam, Purnat, Purnamadachyate, Purnasya, Purnamadaya, Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam.